Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special event. How can you be an artist and reflect the times? Nina Simone once said. Avid Learning, in association with Italian Embassy Cultural Center, Mumbai, presents Fluid Painting Moving Canvas, Making Art in a Precarious World. A roundtable which will probe aesthetic practices in today's world of uncertainty and precariousness. This is our third roundtable. The first, held in August 2016, organized in collaboration with the Israeli consulate, was titled How Cities Grow, a discussion on design, growth, and sustainability of urban spaces. This conversation took the audience from Mumbai to Tel Aviv and around the world as they discussed the very best practices at the confluence of design, culture, technology, and urban planning. The second roundtable, also brought in collaboration with Italian Embassy Cultural Center Mumbai and titled Designing Tomorrow, took a closer look at design innovation and trends with a special emphasis on Italian and Indian practices and products. And today we talk about art. One of the fundamental roles of art always has been to shed light on the human condition, to increase our empathy for each other. Art can be a potent language to speak out. As the world recalibrates to a state of new normal, an unstable existence caused by an unprecedented economic, political, and social turbulence, how does the way we react to the world change? The lines between art forms are more fluid than they have ever been. To discuss further, our panel of experts today includes multidisciplinary artist Beatrice Pedicone, cultural theorist Nancy Adejania, and veteran artist Navjot Altaf, in conversation with gallerist owner of Chatterjee & Lal, Mortimer Chatterjee. Before I welcome our panelists, I'd like to tell you that this is the second in our art trifecta. We had a workshop with Ranjit Hoskote on the art critic John Berger last week, and we have an upcoming panel on creating future stakeholders for art with speakers like Ashish Shah, the architect and art collector, and Minal Vazirani, who is, as you know, the owner of Saffron Art. So without further ado, if you'd like to know any more about our panelists, you have a bio handout on your seat, and over to you, Mort.
Thanks so much, Urshila. Well, thank you so much for coming out in numbers this afternoon. I think that, like me, we all feel honoured to be about to hear the three presentations. I have had a little insight into what you'll be hearing over the next hour or so, and I think we're in for a treat. I think the flow for the afternoon is fairly simple. Each of our three speakers will make a presentation, after which it will allow us to then have a conversation between the four of us, and at the same time inviting everyone with us to make comments as and when they would like to. Just raise your hand and we can take your questions. I'm going to invite our two artists to speak first. Beatrice first, Navjot second. I'm going to ask Nancy, who's here in a maybe a dual role of curator artist, but that's something Nancy will introduce to us a bit later. Third, and then we'll jump into our discussion. So what's really exciting for us is that Beatrice will be introducing work that probably is new to, most of us have not encountered before, and it's always a treat to see work by an artist that maybe we're unfamiliar with. So I think we'll be very excited to see what Beatrice has to show us. And just to let everyone know that you are, of course, part of an exhibition that's coming up in Delhi next week.
Tomorrow.
How exciting. So those of you who are traveling up to Delhi soon will be able to see
after the
work
yeah.
in person.
Yeah.
Beatrice, can I invite you maybe to make your
stand? Shall I sit?
Whatever you prefer. I think Navjot's going to sit. I think, Nancy, you're standing. So you really, whatever you feel comfortable with. We're all friends here.
Okay, so maybe I stand?
Sure.
Okay. So, well, first of all, I want to thank you for this invitation, because it's really incredible for me to be in India. For many reasons, I'm really attached to this country, and I thanks you and the Institute of Culture that organized this event. To start explaining my work, I choose some image and then to video. And first, this image I'm showing first because it's the one that took me to India, and it's part of a work called series called Alien, and that has been shown for the first time in New York with my gallery called CPI, who by coincidence represent a lot of Indian artists. So one of Atul Balla, who is an Indian artist represented by this gallery, saw my work, and he presented my work to an Indian curator, whose name is Premish, who will curate the show at the Italian Institute of Culture in Delhi. And that will be on view from tomorrow. And can you go back? It's also an example of my work. What you see, you could think is a painting. It's not really in a traditional way as a painting on canvas or on paper. It's a painting with oil paint dissolved with some solvent in water, water who has been treated. What interests me is to try to represent through my work the transience and instability, vulnerability, we could say, of our existence, and more the fact that we are not stable anymore in the way we all live, included immigrants, which refer to the as Italian that I live in US, I'm called an alien, and so it refers to different meaning, like political, social, but also something that as a technique you see as awkward, that you cannot define, but in the same time it exists, you recognize it. And another thing that it's part of my work is the technique. I constantly paint on water, but the substance I use have shifted over the years. In fact, if we can see, this was a work, a show in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Rome, and was ink on water. And the theme of the series was around the idea of the birth and the evolution. Then that was Then this is a show at the at Italian Academy at Columbia University in New York, and was white paint on water. Still, the imagery are completely different, and it was a work around the idea of the infinite that could be sky or seaside. So, and this it's paint with food. I choose several different food, as also the ancient artists used to treat organic elements to paint. and he referred to the idea. It was my first work in as I moved to US, as the relation American has with food is very different from the one we have in Italy, of course, and try also to point out the issue about what's food for us, that with all the problem that also it nourish, but at the same time it transform our body, you know, and it was related also. Yeah, I start for the to do a video, and this is a frame of a video with a different substance going through the screen, like presenting the self as actors. And this actually, I think, yeah, is eggs and cream mixed together. And another things I want to say about my work is that I also like, especially for the video, to collaborate with musicians or writers. So here I ask an Italian composer to write a score in sync of the video, to reflect about how the visual could be influenced with music or without music. So the video was in loop, but every 5 minutes it will restart with music and on silence, so the both sides. Here there is an image of the Alien series too, also the 2006 in New York, who shows also the way I show my work, that from the tank of water, what they become. They could be also 4 by 5 inches work, and those are the previous one are Polaroids, and these are Polaroids too, which is a technique that I often use because if I record a fleeting moment, let's say between creation and how do you say destruction? Yeah, I think that Polaroids, instant Polaroids, it very fits with my work because it's the apart from being unique, represent perfectly the instant moment I fix the paint on a photography medium, and I like to talk about photography also because it's the only technique with video that I could use to show the memory of this paint that doesn't exist anymore. It remains just a documentation somehow. And also I use, I have a passion for books. It's so with paper, and 2 years ago I started in 2015. Every month I record a different sequence of the paint for 9 months. So actually, it's referred to the birth itself and and that book is a book I did in March, so it refers with 5 images. This, I don't know if you can really see because there is a lot of light, but it's an installation video on 4 walls. So from the tiny presentation of the 4 by 5 Polaroids, I passed through occupied a space, which is totally dark, and you get in and you are totally surrounded by the paint that surrounds you. And this is a very important to me because also through the physical experience, you get in a space that belongs to everyone, where nobody has a... this is another video. Well, it's... yeah, so you get in and you are totally surrounded by these images, and there is a totally loss of physical limit. So no borders, and everyone are, you really feel we are all part of the same world, and which is a concept that it's really interests me. This is another example of a video which I will present, I will show here, but maybe we have to turn off the light. Not now, because, but for the video, yes, because I said it, for me it's very important, as much as dark as possible, not just because you appreciate the image, because you have really the feeling that there is no limit, no? And then, yeah, this is another example of an installation where the image are on the floor, so you can walk around like small lake, and also because refer to my actual technique. I paint on the floor in a tank full of water. And yeah, this is one of the example of this object, who inside has an original, unique transparency 20 by 24 film.
Can I just ask, what's illuminating the image? Is that the light from above, or that's from, it's a screen?
This is a kind of light box, but on the floor. So the film is a transparency, positive, and behind the image, it's like a box. This is, the second video I will show you. This is an image of the show I had in Rome, and it's the video called Alien, which will be on view in Delhi at the Institute of Culture, which I asked two artists. As I say, the theme alien refer to something alieno, we said in Italian, but it's not the extraterrestrial, but it's the stranger. The stranger refer to immigrants or to whatever we feel we are not totally comfortable with, but still it exists. And I don't know, I can talk, yeah. It's, I don't know if you see, but it's a window, as Italian window with two glass. And it's like, as you get in the room, who is completely dark, you see a world that through this window, who is something is going on strange, but at the same time you feel there is something, you know, especially because working with water, everything feel you already know about it. No, we are made of water, and this, I think, is the. Yeah. This is the last, or oh, okay. Yeah, there is another image I wanted to add to present what I'm working on now. this is a very large Polaroid. It's in inches, well, in centimeter, it's 60 by 80. So inches is 24 by 20, something like that. And it's a real Polaroid. It's a lab that still exists in New York. And so the paper is still the Polaroid. I don't know if you know a little bit about Polaroids, instant film, or shall I say something?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Polaroid has been the major instant film in photography that closed, I think, in 2008, something, yeah. And who was a major thing because all the artists since Andy Warhol used Chuck Close used to use it. And then another company, some guys that were part of the Polaroids open and start the Impossible Project, which are the other Polaroids of mine. But they arrive at the 8 by 10 inches. And so one of the guy who is actually John Brothers, who is an important American artist, who was part of the real Polaroids. When he understood that Polaroid was shutting down, he took all the paper and all the chemical, and he has the real camera in New York, actually at the Film Academy at Lincoln Center. And so that's to tell how much important is and so I thought I had to try, with the large scale format, instant still, to a new project. This project referred to the double side that has water, which nourish but at the same time destroy, which is two themes really current in my work. And it came out, the idea, after I travel in New Orleans. You all know about the hurricane, and there you really feel how everyone is so scared about the water. Somehow you see the nature, like it's here in India also, you have huge trees and huge, but at the same time there everyone is scared, and they are really every day they are influenced by these major things. And so I did a work who try to represent the double aspect, remembering that above all we can do something, but because or we have to do something for the conservation of our nature, because we are nothing compared to the power of nature. The video is in, this video is in silent. So here the video goes on loop and restart, but we can finish here. Maybe I should say something about the video. Has been shown at the Hotel des Artistes in Toulon, in France, and is part of the La Maison Européenne de la Photo and Video collection in Paris, and has been shown for a show who invited video artists from the Mediterranean around the theme of the Mediterranean. So I did something refer to our sea, and this both represent the moon who influenced the mare, the sea. This is the alien video who will be on view at the installation at the Institute of Culture in Delhi.
Beatrice, should we watch an excerpt of this? Is it 11 minutes, this work, or is it?
No, the previous one...
This work?
This is... no, 7 minutes, 6 minutes and something.
Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you so much. It's lovely to have that little moment of silence, actually, after enjoying the works. And for me, the ambient noise, I don't know whether you could hear the little wind blowing in the background. It was quite beautiful. And can I ask, Beatrice, what scale will you be showing this work at in Delhi?
Oh, in Delhi, it's around 1 meter and something per 2 meter and something.
As a single projection?
Yeah, that's a single projection on the final long-length wall.
Right.
And I just want to add saying that I asked two Indian artists, because I like to collaborate, especially as I am invited in a different country. And I asked Nikita Gupta, who is a dancer, to perform in front of the related live.
Yes.
She didn't. She will act. And Ankush Gupta, who is a poet and performer, who will perform in the video room.
And this tomorrow itself?
Yes, just tomorrow for the opening.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Beatrice. Now, Navjot is known to all of us in the room. Is Navjot a little hidden? Can we all see Navjot, or should we may ask you to just...
Yeah.
So, Navjot, can I ask you now to maybe give us your presentation, and you'll be seated, and I think you're...
Yes, and the images will be shown on the...
Wonderful, brilliant. Over to you then.
So I'll need light only for a little while, because I'll be speaking about... Hello?
Yeah.
So I'll be speaking about 3 works of mine, but before that I will like to read 2 paragraphs to give you an idea of my art practice, and which contextualizes my art practice. So and first of all, I'd like to thank Avid to invite me for this roundtable panel. And before I start speaking about my work, I will read these 2 paragraphs. See, if I say that art to me is about things that matter immensely in my life, I would also say that one does not know the world through the application of independent rationality alone. As we are constantly jolted into thought by an encounter with the world, its time, its matters, and its capacity of effect on us. And now more so, because of the enormous impact of digitalization of communication and information systems, which are constantly changing. Then, for quite some time now, I have been interested in Edgar Morin's idea and approach to complex thought, because complexity requires multiple logics, and that are neither separated from each other into neat boxes, nor integrated neatly with each other, but enter into ambivalent relations and tensions in the universe, in nature, and in our reality. So we learn not to be afraid of complexity. So now I'm going to speak about speak about 3 projects. One is Empty Containers, and then Barakhamba 2008-2010, and Soul Breath Wind, which is a work in progress. So Empty Container was part of a very large project, Yamuna Elbe, Contemporary Flows and Fluid Times. And artists were invited here to look at or reflect on 2 rivers, River Yamuna in Delhi and Elbe in Hamburg. So I chose to work in Hamburg, or rather I was invited to work there. And so I began looking at Elbe River and how it had been, I'm saying had been because after that a lot of changes took place, how it had been navigable by commercial vessels since mid-19th century. And since then, it had been deepened 7 times to cater to the needs of large vessels or large ships to pass for trade links. And what was being objected at the time when I went there, which was 2011, that there was a plan of the authorities to further deepening it by 1 meter. And it was already 15.5 meter deep, and the original depth of it was 4 meters. So you can imagine how many times it had been deepened. So, so many questions were being raised about this whole process of deepening and why it was necessary. But there were always different opinions about it. The government who wanted to do it, deepen it, they had a reason that they wanted the larger, yet larger ships, mainly from China and India, to pass, and they wanted it for full navigability and independent of any tidal fluctuation. So, so the ships which had 15.5 meter deep draft for them to pass for, again, to have better commercial links. So the questions which were being raised at that time was, the necessity of dredging for natural purposes and for expansion of trade links. So this entire process, so now, I was doing my own research. It was a collaborative project, and I had an assistant because everything was in German, so I needed to work with people there. So Nina Kallenbach was my assistant and collaborator. So, while one found out the facts and figures, that's never enough. So while this was happening, there was also, so this entire process also created a moment for me to reflect on, human aspirations and our creative potential, our determination to nurture, and our capacity to destroy. So after some time, while I was still looking at my own, research material and looking at my visual experience of the city, this harbor city, Hamburg, and its networking, which was fantastic because I had a lot of facilities to travel in the city, so I could see the entire city from above the eye level, below the eye level. So it was very interesting for me. But wherever I saw, it was all full of containers. So at that time, what came to my mind was 4 lines written by T.S. Eliot, which I'm going to read, which is the endless cycle of idea and action. Endless invention, endless experiment, brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence. And I think this poem kept coming back to my thoughts every time I sat with all that material, which I was very, amazed that in short time one was able to put together. But again, thanks to Nina, because she took me to, various departments, various independent researchers and PhD students, etc., etc. But to me as an artist, the word water or river and container both have metaphorical connotation. And I felt that it is the metaphor which allows us to metaphors are devices which actually allow us to sense or understand one domain of experience in terms of another. So I thought of a work at that moment that my work, empty containers in the form of books, there were about 4,000 books that I made, was an idea used in place of another. And I saw both as books and the container as container of material, container of knowledge, and container of interconnections. So this became an interactive project, and people were invited to interact with it. They could reflect on their own association or relationship with the city or river Elbe. I mean, if people were from Hamburg, or any other river that they could associate with. And so they could, add text, or they could erase text, or they could write their critique or their own reflection, whatever they felt was more current at that time in the book. But the only thing was that people were not going to take away the book, because every book had just one page with text. And the idea was that if people add on, or if they scratch, or if they tear, and when the work goes to another site, then the other people could sort of, had access to even that material, more than the artists, which had already been inside. And so we can, while question answer, we can talk about what is inside the book and what kind of text I incorporated and why I incorporated that. So the second project that I'm going to speak about is Barakhamba, which I did in 2 phases. This was in Delhi, and it was part of 48 degrees Celsius public art and ecology. Now, first phase for me was basically where I examined, it began with examining the very complex relationship between the environment and the urban environment and the cities, development plans, and the people who live there. And people who live in big cities are not a homogeneous, body. So they're different. So everywhere one went, there were different opinions, they were different. But yet, how does one sort of, decide what you want in your work? So, so it began with, meeting people, common people at that site in Barakhamba, but then it expanded by, my going to different areas and meeting different people from different disciplines like environmentalists, activists, artists, PhD students, economists, basically, which gave me an idea of the gradual disappearance of the green cover in Delhi, and a very insensitive removal of trees, all over the city. Because I was able to go to all over the city, and they also gave me an idea of the state of trees and how the, it was totally overlooked. I mean, how the trees were not, I mean, the whole idea of trees in the context of road zone, was totally overlooked. And and then also, it was very obvious and very clear that why it was happening, because of the concretization of the pavements and building of or highways or widening of the roads, etc. And then one also realized that understood. I was also working at that time with a biodiversity scientist, Fayaz Khudsar, who actually runs a biodiversity park in Delhi, and where they have created 1 kilometer of Yamuna. So it was not that, so at that time I had done a lot of work on Yamuna and why Yamuna was what Yamuna is in Delhi, the 25 kilometer stretch that it flows through the city. So, that was my understanding in, and during the first phase. But during the second phase, with the people I had already interacted in the first phase, that is, people like Ajay Mahajan, who is an environmentalist, and Fayaz, who is a biodiversity scientist, that we collaborated. And we collaborated basically to look at trees, like I said, in the context of road zone. And which actually resulted into working with the NMDC, New Delhi, NDMC, New Delhi Municipal Corporation, and the Horticulture Department. So here, what was more significant for me for the second phase was that apart from the, our extended communication between the collaborators, because we had 1 year in between to, decide, so which became from a very short-term project, which was Barakhamba 2008, it became a long-term project because we had enough time to work out or to develop our own working relationships, and also how to invite and engage the government agencies, because the project that we were looking at was de-choking of the trees. And like I said, because of the concretizations and all, one realized that, the lakhs of trees had been choked, totally choked, which, in the most well-known areas also, including the historic two stretches of Barakhamba Road from, Connaught Place to Tolstoy Road, Marg, and from Tolstoy Marg to Mandi House. So, because we had a very specific, focus, what we were going to do, and that had actually developed over the period. And working with horticulture departments, the chief of horticulture department, what I realized that because he put me in touch with a lot of individuals who were also, taking initiatives to take care of, with specific focus, on how to save the trees. So at that time I realized that it's not that only artists intervene in public spaces. There are all kinds of people who are intervening in public spaces and taking action to whatever they are focusing on. So that was very interesting. And then also what was more interesting was in this project was that this project was not a construction of an object, but rather an action by an artist and initiated by the artist and the collaboration to benefit the tree and the environment. So that was, I felt that quite important for us, and it happened. And it happened because the state agency got involved with it and they could carry out the project later also. So if you see, so every time I go to Delhi, I mean, now I've not been doing, but till 2014, what happened to those trees which were almost dying, and these were very specific trees. And during their metro, projects in Delhi, what they had done was like they had, planted large ficus trees, pilkin trees, on top of the railway stations, especially in Barakhamba and Connaught Place. So what was happening that they had planted those trees, but there was no use of those trees because those trees would not grow that big, and they would sort of keep grooming them. So this tree, which is supposed to be giving you, goods and services, doesn't really give to the environment. So keeping in mind all those things we had concentrated on, that one needed to de-choke the trees. So de-choking was more of a symbolic action by the artist, which was initiated by the artist and her collaborators, but later followed up by the NDMC. The third project that I'm going to speak about is Soul Breath Wind, which is a work in progress. And I have been working in Bastar for last more than 15, 20 years. And but for last 6-7 years, I have also been going to northern central part of Chhattisgarh, whereas Bastar is in southern part. So, so this project actually looks at and questions the ongoing socio-ecological transformation of the landscape and the loss of biodiversity, which has impacted the communities living there in those areas. And how it is also leading to displacement and people's rights over their decision making and their cosmovision, in which they, in which human, non-human, and nature prospers, and their cultural dynamics not destroyed. So now all this is happening because of the coal mining there, and to generate more power. And we all know that most of the power which is generated is not really for people living there, but it is for people in the urban area. And so mining, when you look at mining, I feel that it is viewed vital for the advanced development of the country, but no matter how reckless its impact. And looking at the whole procedures of land acquisition, or the way this kind of industrialization is carried out, in my opinion, this kind of development is moving with furious energy in an opposite direction. Direction which is causing destruction and slow violence. But it's not considered violence at all, because the focus is solely on economic growth. And so the work also addresses the communities, communities struggle against very powerful forces committing crime by increasing the vulnerability of ecosystems and increasing the conflicts within the communities. So people in the video, I mean, just because the work is still not over, I don't want to, I still haven't edited it fully. So, but the people in the video speak about how, how difficult it is for law or the, decision-making bodies to even imagine, their relationships with land, water, or forest, which is rooted in a very different conceptual framework. And they speak of, if it is, development, then how is it that every living being in that area is facing the high consequences risks, which actually Beck and Giddens call manufactured risks. They feel that, we are manufacturing these risks. So I'm interested in these kind of issues that, when you manufacture those risks, what happens? So, but apart from all that, these community people, especially in Raigad area, there are, despite all the uncertainties and despite all the political pressure on them, people from 56 villages have come together. So people often ask me, which community do they belong? They don't belong to one community, but what I feel that they're setting up a community. It's not a community as given to them, but it has sort of, has been formulated through dialogue and cooperation, which I personally see as a space for containment and place for collaboration. And in this kind of in this kind of settings, I have experienced or witnessed, the emergence of processes of learning for life. And it is in this kind of settings I've seen that people's living knowledge and wisdom surges forth. So this is in the northern central part of Chhattisgarh, but in the southern part, people are not only facing, and that is in Belladella side, Dantewada, people are not only facing the issues concerning, I've already spoken about mining, but they're also facing and dealing with the militarization of the area. because of the conflicts between the people and the local police and the, ultra-red or the extreme left, forces there. So the work is not only about the problem, but the work is also about how people themselves are now trying to, sort of deal with the issues. And they're not, waiting for the authorities to, give them the agencies to do that, but rather they want to be stakeholder of in any of the development which is going on, and they're all, learning now other renewable ways of generating power. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Navjot, for a stimulating presentation. Nancy, you're going to get... Sure. So I think Nancy's also going to present to us sitting down. So we'll give...
Thank you, Navjot. Thank you. And thank you, Avid Learning, for inviting me to SR House. This is the first time I'm speaking here. I've often been a part of the Avid Learning platforms, the mobile platforms, which take place all over the city. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Asad. And the brief for today is to talk about multidisciplinary expanded art practices. And in the night when I was preparing my presentation, I'm a nocturnal animal. So first I was going to make this brief presentation around the works of 3 artists, whose work I admire. But then I thought that perhaps I need to do something counterintuitive. And instead of analyzing the works of these 3 artists, I decided that I would actually talk about the expanded practice of a critic curator. But before I go into that and unpack that, I'd like to just give you a brief, I'd just like to make some brief notes about the historical evolution of expanded practices. So, what characterizes contemporary artistic practices is a movement away from the legacies of modernism. Among them, a hard-won vocabulary of images, a recognizable signature style, medium specificity, the chosen institutional habitat of the white cube, i.e. the gallery or the museum, the designated public space for sculptural expression, and the myth of the artist as solitary genius, typically male in a modernist lore. That's Henry Moore. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Oh, no. There's the Eva Hess image. That's one. Thank you. Beginning with the 60s and with increasing momentum in the last few decades, artists have reconfigured their strategies of representation in response to shifting and evolving contexts. Their practices are characterized by a post-historical openness to diverse sources, citations, genres, media, and formats. These practices include evidence of process, research and documentation, interactive encounters in the works, a variety of sites of varying levels of informality, and collaborative or delegated processes of being and working, as we have seen in Navjot's practice right now. To summarize, many contemporary art practices are hybrid expanded practices. Holding these features of an art practice in mind, I have decided to go against the grain of expectation by concentrating on the work of the American activist, critic, and curator, Lucy Lippard. You might be surprised by my choice, but then again, you should not be. If you were to look at the artisanal manner in which Lippard has dealt with political and artistic issues by melding nous and techne together, you would not be surprised. In an interview, Lippard told Hans Ulrich Obrist, and I quote her, "People would say, 'Oh, Lucy is becoming an artist.' And that really annoyed me. If the artists could do whatever they wanted to and call it art, I could do what I want and call it criticism, close quote. That's, of course, Eva Hesse, on whom Lucy Lippard has written a brilliant monograph. That's Lucy Lippard for you. If we look at Lippard's practice, it is no different from that of an artist today who's engaged in everything but what was conventionally understood to be art as embodied in an art object. Take, for instance, artists who act as curators, programmers and activists, artists who work with surveillance feed or intercepts, or who delegate their work amongst an assembly of colleagues, or use the questionnaire, anthology, or the interview format. Let us set aside the mere nominalism of designating a particular kind of cultural producer as an artist or a curator. Let us bracket for the moment particular institutional circulations of careers and practices. And instead, let us judge by the actual methods and outcomes of the practice. Lucy Lippard may have begun her career in the 1950s with the institutional setting, within the institutional setting of a museum, in an institution no less than the MoMA, whose hegemonic Euro-American narrative framed global art history. Barring this brief stint at the MoMA, she has freelanced all her life, writing, researching, and curating conceptual and feminist art practices, and we might add, agitating, which is also a full-time job. In 1969, she was picketing the very museum she had worked in. She was part of the Art Workers Coalition that protested against the museum on a range of issues over a period of time. They protested against the fact that artists did not have a say in policy matters at the museum, that the artists were not allowed to unionize. They also protested against the neglect of the work of women artists in the museum collection. Lippard's first exhibition, tantalizingly called Eccentric Abstraction in 1966, anticipated post-minimalism, process art, anti-form art, and brought into visibility works of artists such as Eva Hesse, Louise Bourgeois, and Bruce Nauman. It was, she says, an attempt to blur boundaries, in this case between minimalism and something more sensuous and sensual, that is, in retrospect, something more feminist, close quote. Lippard allowed art criticism to share its boundaries with fiction and let curation shade into the creation of art. Her novel, I See You Mean, was an annotation of group photographs accompanied by an index. And when Kniston Bakshein invited Lippard to contribute a critical essay to the catalogue of his path-breaking show, Information, in 1970, she said, "When I produced an incomprehensible, randomly selected thing, curator Kniston Bakshein had no choice but to list me as an artist," close quote. Her famous numbered exhibitions of the late 60s, early 70s, which stood for the population of the cities of Seattle and Vancouver, were composed from a relay of instructions circulated and shared amongst a group of artists, Owen Kavara, Sol Levitt, Carl Andre, and others. So here you have Robert Smithson's instruction on one of these catalog cards, which would then be circulated, and Sol Levitt would add his instructions and so forth. Lippard saw these exhibitions through the prism of archaeology, and I quote her, "Deliberately low-key art often resembles ruins, like Neolithic rather than classical monuments, amalgams of past and future, remains of something more, vestiges of some unknown venture." I went on to talk about the ghost of content which hovers over the most obdurately impenetrable art, and suggested that the more open or ambiguous the experience offered, the more the viewer is forced to depend upon his or her own perceptions, close quote. It was for the numbered exhibitions that she received the criticism about the curator playing an artist's role. And I quote her. And I quote, in fact, the critic who actually criticized Lippard. There is a total style to the show, a style so pervasive as to suggest that Lucy Lippard is in fact the artist and the medium is other artists. And her medium is other artists. She was, of course, unfazed by this criticism and preferred to blur boundaries between disciplines, media, and format. The DIY ethic of self-organization has always been consistent throughout her practice. She has curated shows in galleries, in small museums, in shop windows, in prisons, in community halls. It is impossible to summarize the work of Lippard, who has written widely and curated several political shows, including feminist art shows. Her seminal books on conceptual art and feminist art practice, 6 years dematerialization of the art object from 1966 to 72, this conceptual art book, which is a seminal book, it grows rhizomatically. It's, it's almost like there's a bibliography, and that bibliography then rhizomatically grows other nodes, and those other nodes are artist interviews, archives of artists, documents, artworks, and so forth. And all of this is brought together with the critics' annotations. And her, again, another seminal book, which is From the Center, Feminist Essays on Women Art, brought out in 1976, which is based on Lippard's account of the early days of the feminist art movement from the barricades. For somebody who was at the forefront of the anti-war movement and the feminist movement, and an active member and collaborator of the artist community in New York, she retreated in the 1990s to a village in New Mexico. But her retirement was only a retirement away from the noise of the mainstream American art scene. It was not away from the issues of social justice or from the transformative potential of political art. She now regularly brings out a community newsletter about watershed development and other such environmental issues, and writes on Native American art. She believes that by focusing on the local, you have a better understanding of global capitalism. In her 2014 book, Undermining, a wild ride in words and images through land use politics in the changing West, Lippard writes as a geographer, an anthropologist, art historian, and an environmental activist. Through what she calls a collage aesthetic, she brings together an eclectic range of concerns: fracking, which is a very brutal form of mining, Indian land rights, their sacred sites, tourism, land art, and so forth. She hopes in this book that artists will be able to formulate new strategies of resistance to undermine the destruction of our planet. She prefers to use the term land use with all its connotations of human greed, rather than the more romanticized notions of land, earth, which are exemplified in the construct of the landscape or land art. When Lippard was asked whether an undue emphasis on the local would produce a tunnel vision and prevent us from seeing the bigger picture, she said, "For now, I worry more about the loss of the small picture. Local does not have to be isolated, self-indulgent, or inbred. In fact, those terms would better apply to the art world." Close quote. And now I'd like to segue into Navjot's work. We are, there's an umbilical cord connecting us, so. And I'm just going to read a little extract from my book, The 13th Place, and which is a monograph on Navjot's practice. And in the late 1990s, Navjot began to work with artists like Raj Kumar and Shanti Bai and other people in the village of Kondagaon in Bastar. And they worked on collaborative and cooperative projects that produced new forms of sociality through the process of dialogue, which is what she was talking about. And one of the outcomes of their working together was the Dialogue Center, which became a site for an assembly of people who could come together and talk across the class, caste, and gender divide. While I've written the monograph from an art historical perspective with a politics of culture approach, I will be reading from the book. I will be reading the epilogue. And I will just be reading a little extract. And this extract, is in this extract, memoir and political commentary intersect each other. And through this intersection, I question the constructs of land, landscape, and that abominable brutality we call rape. So here is the extract. As if the earth's heart had been torn out, an epilogue. I remember that morning in Buster vividly. I had woken up in a green haze. Shantibai had collected the intoxicating mahua flowers that had fallen on the ground and was laying them out to dry at the dialogue center. We had planned a trip to the Chitrakoot Falls. Before motoring down to the falls, we walked through a clearing of gorgeous sal trees, the air ringing suddenly with the laughter of children jumping up to cradle themselves in a tangle of vines. I had caught a glimpse of the falls in Navjot's exquisite video, Water Weaving, but to see the water gushing down from a height of almost 100 feet, unmediated by the camera lens, was a sublime, even vertiginous experience. We must have been mere specks against these magnificent cascades, streaked in lustrous silver. As I approached the abyss to act out my Caspar David Friedrich moment, his wanderer above the sea of fog in my mind's eye, I lost my balance and was steadied by the small but strong hand of X, the young woman who cooked and made paper toys at the dialogue center. X's ready smile belied the horrifying experiences to which she had recently been subjected. She had been raped by her former boyfriend, who, to add insult to injury, had abducted and married her sister. As X continued to hold my hand in a firm grip, I found myself pondering over the semantics of the word rape. Sometimes we may detect a certain patriarchal schadenfreude in the tone of journalists who pervasively apply the word both to violence against tribal women's bodies and to the exploitation of their land, implying an annihilatory finality. We hear the word repeated again and again. There is talk of the rape of the forests in tribal areas by the British colonial administration, of the rape of the mineral-rich land by the Indian state operating in tandem with rapacious corporations, and yet again of the rape of tribal women by the Salwa Judum, the lawless militia raised by the state to counter Maoist terror in the Red Corridor. The structural violence of the situation is seemingly reinforced by a rhetorical violence, one that reenacts material violations at the discursive, cognitive, and epistemic levels. This reenactment serves to stabilize and naturalize in the public consciousness at large a belief that the tribal communities are always and only victims unable to frame their own destiny. Thus, unfortunately, even as they become objectified as the obstacles to an exploitation of material resources by the dominant elites, they become objectified in discourse as well, as a site of contestation between the technocrats and policymakers who oppress them and the activists and researchers who champion their cause. It therefore comes as a welcome surprise to hear in Navjot's video, Soul Breath Wind, made in 2014, the voices of individuals from tribal communities addressing us in propria persona, bearing direct witness to the predicament. Thank you.
So thank you to all three of you for such provocative presentations. I was worried at the outset as to whether we would have three presentations that were so divergent that we wouldn't have collective things to talk about, but I think quite the reverse. I think that we've landed in a wonderful space where there seem to be threads quite clear amongst all three presentations. So perhaps the way we could format this is if I throw out a couple of provocations, which I'd like all three of you maybe to respond to. I have 2 or 3 here, after which maybe then we can invite our audience also to participate in. The first provocation which I have really is I think the idea of collaboration has cropped up in everyone's presentation in different ways and different manners. Beatrice, in terms of a work which perhaps I have read about, the choreographed piece. I know you've worked also on record covers, and I'd like you maybe just to touch on those two. Navjot, it's clear throughout your practice that collaboration has been at the heart of the work you've made. And of course, today with the counterintuitive, as you say, presentation, the idea of critic as artist, but very much within the mold of collaborator. I suppose my provocation is where the line is drawn, and it's something in the last, your last extract, which you read from the epilogue of 13th Place, where the line is drawn between collaboration and instrumentalizing your collaborator, where the danger is, as is clear and present, I think in that little quote from the night, which exhibition was it? The numbered exhibitions that the artist, the critic has, in essence, instrumentalized perhaps the artists in how does one create parity in the relationships, and where are the dangers inbuilt within collaborations? That's my first question. Maybe Beatrice, you might like to
Maybe now? Yes. Yes, it's okay. Well, I would spoke about maybe contamination in the sense that when I ask collaboration, I also like that other artists from other discipline contaminates my work. No, it's I work with the water, which is a fluid element, and that you also cannot control. So it's a very conceptual work. It's not just about the form. So in every step I made, I go through that idea. So I think it's good. Of course, you try to collaborate with the people that are around your sphere, no? But you never know where you go. No, when I collaborate, you mentioned the choreography. The choreographer asked me because the theme was about the immigration through the Mediterranean, and so the dislocation of all these people. And as I was working with water, that's the reason she asked me. Then we talk a lot about it, and it was a commission, and the imaginary was not really, you never looked at the movement of the water. It was referred much more to the flight of birds, you know, when the dislocation of that, but in a very evocative way, as my work has always been. No, it's not documental in a...
And as I didn't know this until you were speaking this afternoon, but in Delhi you will also be inviting dancers to to work
A
with
dancer,
your,
she's, even because it's not so huge, the,
So
the
this is
video room. So,
But
but
the-
I like, it's, as I say, it's a work in movement, no? So I like the dance and dance music and painting in water, they have a lot in common. No? Nevertheless, the fact that they have to be recorded to remain in life, no? Because they pass through. So, and my work is also about the timing, you know. So, when the dancer will dance, it will be in silence, and then the performant poet who will do a voice performance. So they are two different moments.
You're allowing them the freedom.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, I think my work is also very experimental, so I like not to control. It's about also let things go, no? So as even in my technique of painting, I cannot control until the end. No, the water move depending on my action, and so I also like them to perform live. And maybe they say sometimes they don't even know where they will end.
Sure. Navjot, can I slightly reframe the question in your case, in particular in terms of your collaboration with communities in Chhattisgarh? And Nancy, in the 13th place, talks about this idea of devolution, that a process by which you yourself, in a sense, give up and give away. And maybe, Nancy, you can frame it much better than I can. But in order to create equitable collaborations, it's something that I know that you've thought very deeply about. In Chhattisgarh, there is something called the Dialogue Center, which you set up, which enables these kinds of conversations also to take place. But of course, when the art then gets recontextualized within city centers, within urban gallery settings and museum, within the contemporary art discourse, how have you worked through the dangers implicit with collaborations of this kind?
See, I had, my first collaboration was in 1994. You know, when I first collaborated with 4 women creative people, filmmakers and a classical singer in Bombay. So at that time, I was in the process of understanding what actually collaboration is. So at this stage, I would say that after collaborating with different people from different disciplines, I would look at collaboration from different levels, you know, because I personally feel some works are interactive and cooperative. Because in cooperation, what happens, it's artist's idea, and other people cooperate to realize the work. You know, so then that's not a total collaboration. You know, I mean, within collaboration, these are, you know, the different steps. And my very first collaboration, I realized that it was the interactive aspect of, you know, our working. And that sort of, you know, led to collaboration, one. And then there's always a dialectics, you know, I mean, ever changing. But I personally feel collaboration is where nobody has to really abandon, you know, one's own way of thinking, where it becomes, each person's contribution nourishes the work, you know, enhances the work rather than one person sort of overriding the other. And in reality, actually, you know what, working with people is not easy correspondence at all. It's quite tough because it is, I see it as a process of extended communication, you know, processes, within which if we are able to listen to each other, we are able to critique, we are able to tell one another, only then when, it sort of creates an openness, for each one to understand each other. And it's only then it is possible that you learn to articulate, the disjointed, viewpoints into a creative, into an active cycle. Only when that happens, collaboration happens.
And with respect, in particular, to the collaborators that we see in Soul Breath Wind, there has been a history of, again, in kind of creating. The one sees often these artists within an emporium setting, rather than. So even what you have been doing in itself is a fairly new kind of framing, often for these artists. I'd like to know if you could just talk a little bit to the realities of how within the constraints of the art market, how you have worked through some of those challenges of the inbuilt hierarchies that we face, especially within the Indian context.
Yeah, I've been criticized, and I've been often asked these questions, that you show in galleries, you show in museums, you show everywhere, but few people know that whichever work I make, I take to the very same people who have participated, whether it was Lekuna and Testimony, or whether it was, where I went to Ahmedabad, I showed, or whether it was even Barakhamba. People were surprised. They said that, they welcome your coming back, because people feel that you have come there, you are sort of using them as your raw material, you are sort of appropriating, you alter, vagara, and then artist forgets about it. So I think you have to be conscious about what you say to those people. After all, why should they be participating in your, we are not somebody, who have some kind of authority where we are giving them something, nothing. It's how do you first of all create those grounds for, communication. You can't just go and tell a shopkeeper, I want to speak to you. They're used to, because a lot of newspaper agencies and all, they come and they take people's interviews and all that. But so during Barakhamba also, when I put that work there, so where the work didn't end there, where the very same people who were in that area, that is the local common people, they also came. Then there was a camera which was also looking at my interaction with the very same people who had participated in my work. So they became first the participants, then they become the viewers, and then they become participants again. So this is how I have been trying my best within my own means, or whatever means we get, to include the people at different stages, and not end with after the work is done.
I think the microphone's an empty signifier for an actual microphone. So, Nancy, can I then place, and really being naughty, the idea of the critic curator, where the charge is that, okay, the instrumentalization of artists within a curated exhibition, one of his charges, I would say with increasing frequency, especially perhaps in exhibitions outside India, where artists from South Asia are being presented in contexts where they may be somewhat unfamiliar to those audiences, and then it's really often the curator plays an extraordinarily important part in opening up those practices to audiences who may be fresh to those the artist practices. So in the context of Lippard, we can see that the charge has been made, but in your own experience and in your own research and travels, maybe you could talk to that idea a little bit.
I will, but I want to just go back a little bit to what you said earlier when you had a spontaneous response to my presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, when you talked about when you naughtily talked about the critic who actually complains about
Yes.
Lucy Lippard
Yes.
being an artist.
Yes.
In the context of the numbered exhibitions.
Yes.
And he says that
there's a total style.
yeah, that the whole style of the show is so pervasive that, you know, Lucy Lippard is the artist and her is the art. The curator becomes the artist and her medium are the artists. So I just thought it's important to clarify here that Lucy actually had a PhD. She did a PhD on Max Ernst. So she was an art historian. She wasn't an autodidact. Her first job, as I said, was at MoMA. She worked with Alfred Barr. Now, the thing is that although, she was privileged by her education to become an academic or to become a curator in a museum, she chose the life of a freelancer. She chose a life of risk, and instability. And importantly, this charge actually doesn't work of the critics because she was a friend of the artists. And also, she was a great diagnostician because she was living, breathing the air that the artists were living and breathing at that time in New York, the 60s and the 70s. And there were constant discussions. The scene wasn't the way it is today, an atomized art scene. People were constantly dialoguing, questioning, arguing. And she would, because she was all the time in and out of the artist studios, she could make shows which were ahead of her times, like the Eccentric Abstraction show, where she says, that it is in a way she's actually retrieving some of the surrealist impulses. And why was she retrieving these surrealist impulses in 1966? Because it was a way to counter the Greenbergian notion of formalism. So this whole very mediumistic sort of painting. And what she is doing is that she is recovering these surrealist impulses and recalibrating them, and she's looking at the works of women artists who are making these sculptures which are very different from the vocabulary of a male abstract sculptor. And she talks about eccentricity, quirkiness, softness, sensuality, and she starts framing the practices of Louise Bourgeois, Eva Hesse. So here is a critic curator who's working shoulder to shoulder with the artists, championing their cause. So she's by no means somebody who's dictatorial. If she wanted to be dictatorial, she would have been part of an institution. She would have been another Alfred Barr. But she wasn't. She decided to, extricate herself from the politics of institutionality and create her own politics. Which was to picket the museums or to put up shows in non-art spaces. And and that's why I've quoted her often in this brief presentation, because she is also, very skeptical and also humorous. And she just said, I didn't really care about the museum culture or about art history. What was important for me was artists, artworks, and the air that they were breathing, the conversations that they were having. And then she said something really beautiful, which is, she said, I was tempted to write on art because I knew that it was impossible to write on art. So the impossibility of writing on art is what actually drove her and continues to drive her. So I think that what I'm saying is that there is a certain boundary condition where the blur happens, but either you can instrumentalize that boundary condition, or you can do something else, which is collaborate, and which is what Lucy Lippard did.
And is it possible to dig down at all on where the boundary lies, or is it how? Or can you talk to us a little bit of the dangers now beyond Lippard and within your own peer group, especially within the context of international exhibitions that we see in exhibitions that are taking work from South Asia overseas? And maybe you don't want to speak to that, and that's absolutely fine as well. I'll move on to my... But if you have anything to say on the data inherent.
Yeah. The kinds of shows that you are perhaps alluding to are the shows where I think for them, I don't think really that they're interested in even thinking about what's going on in the artist's mind, or prognosticating on the artwork or the art movement. Those are not things that interest them. For them, they are like these empty containers, which exist in Navjot's Hamburg project, you know. I mean, they're just filling those empty containers with the artworks, and then, you know, the artwork is being imported and exported across the globe. So this is, that kind of practice is not collaborative. It's not cooperative. It's basically an instrumentalized form of practice, which only caters to that particular institution. It could be a museum, it could be the large survey show. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Joe, anything to say on and I do want to ask you about what were inside the books. You asked us to ask you, so I am asking.
Somebody else.
Yes, I'm asking. So maybe you can quickly tell her. And I'd also then like to move on to my next question. Maybe you'd like to answer first, since I'm going to give you the microphone. Each of us, and I love the idea of the nomenclature of land use over land art, but it's something all three of you have spoken to about the environment, the damage to the environment, and the way that it speaks within your own practice. And as we saw, I think, in very extremely different ways and manners. Maybe you would like to talk to the contemporary moment. I know that in the organizers, Avid, were also in some of the provocations, they've asked us to talk about the world that we're seeing, the current climate, the current state of affairs with regards to the environment, and how you perhaps see it feeding into your practice in the past, present, and even now going forward. But my container question first.
I would say that, first of all, one has to understand, how do we even understand land? What is land, what is landscape? Now, for example, like this participant in my film says that how difficult it is for law or the decision maker to understand within the accepted notion of, ownership and property, the relationship with land, which I've said that, which is sort of, it's rooted in a very different conceptual, framework. That's one. So how do I understand that? And what landscape I'm talking about? And landscape itself is such a vast, subject if you talk about. I think I would say that how each person perceives the meaning of land and what land means to the person, But it is a very complex question, and the answer can be quite many.
Yeah. Okay, so Beatrice, maybe over land also, I thought water was this wonderful thread which also flowed through all
like
three.
Land, which is actually nobody's property. But even that has been, when it has been privatized. So when you start looking deeper into, so water is not, it's a beautiful feeling. You can be, it creates also a lot of fear. When I look at the sea, I'm excited about it, but also, it fills me with a lot of fear because of the vastness of it. But in that context, if you look at water, especially river, river is actually a natural thing, it's not a commodity which can be owned by, but it is happening that how the companies have been privatizing it. So the other kind of questions sort of, start coming up with, and this kind of the real situations.
And what, as you say, both comforting and fearful, and that's something Beatrice actually talked to, the idea of creation and destruction within these kinds of dualities that exist within the environment, within nature, and that's clearly seen in...
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I totally agree. It's a very vast theme, no? It's, I would say, yeah, it's land, earth, universe. The point is, what are we doing for it? And I think it's a huge issue and question. In my point of view, if every one of us, in our small world, do something, maybe, it will change. And but what was the next question?
So I suppose really, on a more formal level in your work, the way that water in particular plays its part very much in it's kind of a medium-specific question also, because you're...
Well, in fact, I try to recreate somehow, no, in my small tank, the kind of effect that in nature would happen, no? So it's also, in fact, I didn't talk today, but a big part of my process is also the chemical technique, would you say. I collaborate also with a chemist for the research of the right substance, and as I work directly with an element that it's part of nature, it recreates in a small size what movement of physics.
And Nancy, would you like to say more?
No, I don't know if I answer exactly. Or
no, of course. I'm not looking for a specific answer anyway, so it's just, merely as a provocation. And in Lippard's case, in terms of the exhibition that you just touched upon, perhaps you could talk a little more about, I can't remember the year, so maybe about the nature of this conversation at that time, and perhaps any exhibitions that you yourself have been involved with where these questions have been of some importance. Yes.
So yeah, the slide on the screen was the book cover, Undermining. And again, the book itself is like an artist's book. So while it speaks from many centers and many perspectives, geography, mining, tourism, Indian land rights, and so forth, it also is a treat in terms of its visual appeal. She always has all the pictures, the photographs on top, and then the text runs. And then there are just pages where there are just images. So she also wants a certain kind of immersive experience for the reader. So it has to be both experiential and provocative. And I have also been very much interested in these questions of land use over landscape, because of course a landscape, when you paint a landscape and you put it up in a gallery, it's something that you are then going to be consuming, and it's always something that you will be looking at from the outside. And as Lippard says, for her, when she talks about the sense of place, the sense of place is always something that you experience from the inside. The landscape is always something that you would experience from the outside. It's something that whooshes past you. And also, what's really interesting about Undermining or The Lure of the Local, both these books, is that she talks about the necessity to deal with the local. And here again, it's also, you can connect it to Mivon Kwon's book, One Place After Another, where again, both these authors, Lippard and Mivon Kwon, are talking about artists who are frequently flying, and they're, they're going from one place to another to participate in community art or public art practices. And not all of them are, engaged deeply in that particular local environment. So they make their work, and then, of course, they're back on the plane. So Lippard actually talks about why it's important that wherever you are, you take that local environment seriously. And you have a certain responsibility towards that environment. And how the corporate culture is creating a certain sense of homogeneity. But Lippard is actually countering, saying that we need to counter that homogeneity by keeping intact the multiracial, multicultural environment that US can take pride in, but which is, of course, being slowly eroded today.
You've read my mind, because that's precisely where I wanted to go for my last provocation, which is precisely the idea of displacement and emplacement. And it's again something that speaks, I think, very much to Navjot's work. And interestingly, Beatrice she has a work called Alien, and she has a work that really talks to the idea also of displacement and migration. So first to Navjot, could I just ask you to talk about this idea, once again stealing from Nancy, the idea of emplacement, and how rather than this kind of transitory, peripatetic nature of the artistic practice that sees one flying over the world constantly. You chose a very different kind of engagement that saw you rooted in an environment. And then I'd like to then maybe move to Beatrice, and also you are working in an environment itself which is not your own birthplace, and you have moved and you've then encountered your own kind of sense of estrangement from your own rootedness. So how you've also dealt with this idea of displacement.
You want to answer this?
I think, well, New York is a very particular city, no? So I don't know if I would have moved somewhere else, definitely would have been a totally different experience, no? Because it's really particular. For my experience has been coming from Italy, very interesting, the fact that the arts community of all the discipline meet together, which I don't know why, but as a Roman, I'm from Rome, it's much more separate. I would say, if you think about that, my biggest artist friends now are from Rome, but I met them in New York. So I really don't know if there are boundaries anymore. We are all immigrants. Even the one that burned in the same city and lived in the same city. I think it's something much deeper, you know. It's the maybe the fact that there is no assurance, you know, like no limit, you know, but as I say, fluidity or yeah.
Thank you. Navjot?
So, two things I would like to say. One is that there's a difference between, the displacement when it is a forced displacement, and when you displace yourself knowingly, consciously. Like I displaced myself from the north to Bombay, knowingly that I'm going to study here, knowingly that I'm going to stay in Bombay. So Bombay becomes a place where I will deal with all the problems. But if I'm forced to go to another place where I don't want to, but then I think there's another kind of situation that you are dealing with, and it raises other kinds of questions. So in this case, it was, I see that I went there because it was a choice, one. And also, I feel that it was my choice to learn about culture other than I had grown up in. So in that case, also when you go there, it's not simple. It's not that you want to go there and you go there and everything is, hanky-dory. So in fact, it's very, how do you begin there? So I think there, I personally feel when you displace yourself, what becomes most important, what became most important for me to reflect on it's like self-reflexivity, and self-reflexivity because it also involves critical viewpoint, where you are not looking at everything the way you want to, but also to understand that culture and within that culture and what you know. And then also it becomes very, and also I went from a kind of background which makes you conscious about every question that you're asking. That was my education right from the beginning. So I didn't go innocently or ignorantly there. You may be innocent sometimes while you make mistakes and all that, but then every question that you're asking also one should always remember, I thought that because before that I had also done, some projects in which I was already sort of, looking at my own way. When you're interviewing somebody, what you know, say supposing I went to Ahmedabad, I knew something about the situation, but when I'm interviewing somebody, what I know should not overshadow what the person is going to tell me. So I was somewhat conscious about these things, not that one has not made mistakes. We have made mistakes because you're human. And, so I think that's part and parcel of, intervention. So, when you know the possibilities and problematic, I think the questions you raise are also, are very different.
Thank you, Navjot. Nancy, is there anything you'd like to respond to in this idea? Otherwise, please.
I mean, is it okay, or do we have time? Or yeah. So you asked me about whether I've curated something on the landscape, and I just remembered, of course, because one does so many different things and one lives in so many different compartments. I did curate a show called Landscapes, The Landscapes of Where, for the Steinducher Gallery, with artists like Prajakta Pallav and Pooja Iranna, and also the DMC, Sonal Jain and Mrigank Madhukalia. And at that time I was looking at, why did I have this very elusive title? There were some people who were completely confused, and they said, what does that mean, the landscape of where? But I remember Jeet Tile, the poet, when I sent him an invite, and he said, wow, this is beautiful. He said, one day when you write your memoirs, Nancy, call it the landscapes of where. So landscapes of where actually had to do with the militarization of the landscape, and how today you cannot look at the landscape through the romantic pastoral lens, because the landscape is completely transformed. And, it has been morphed into something else, something unrecognizable. So, Pallav actually making her, paintings, landscapes, urban landscapes, which could be, blurring the line between a mountainscape and a mountain which is actually filled with slums, So, or DMC again had this absolutely stunningly beautiful video where, the urban scape of Guwahati was shot as if, as if that traffic scape was actually a river, and the vehicles were moving like oars in a river. So again, the sense of flux. So very different kinds of registers, from something being transformed by Photoshop, something where the landscape, is being sort of being surveilled by a drone, to to actually certain energies of the landscape, the narratival energies, the mythic energies of the landscape, which can still exist even within a cityscape, and which sort of surface, by mimicking a river or a sea, certain sounds, certain affect.
Thank you for that, Nancy. And is it, yeah, please.
I just want to add one point
please.
Where I ended, then he can. What I was saying, that even when you're trying to sort of understand another culture, like I said, in which I'm not, but it's perpetually unraveling. It's not that, so that's what I want to say. It's perpetually unraveling,
Just interrogate that a little more. What is constantly unraveling?
It's, now, for example, when you are trying to understand, let's say, for example, other knowledge systems, and you think that you know a little bit,
right,
but you actually never know enough, and also when you're talking to people, like if I say, the people say, how do you understand things? So I would say that, if I, look at the complexity of reality and the narrative, somebody is telling me the narrative. Yet there's a lacuna, you never understand fully, even if you think you have understood, So these problems are there, all along. And so, so it's, nothing is politically correct that you are doing, or so you actually learn through, making mistakes and not doing correct things, or,
So listen, in the spirit of questioning and making mistakes, if anyone from our audience would like to put a question to any of our three esteemed speakers, now is your chance. I can see that the teas and the coffees are being now enjoyed. We're all going to jump in and have some soon. But if there are any last thoughts or questions, please, now is your moment.
Well, I was just curious about Beatrice's work. because I don't know you too well, so I don't know about what you're fully trying to say. You know, you mentioned the aspect of immigration, for example, the Mediterranean, water, of course, associated with all that, and going across the seas and you know, all that's associated with migrations. You also mentioned the aspect of the tsunami. And now these are all experiences or phenomena which induce this pain in the you know, human being and others who witness it. And but by your sheer technique of working on this, that I mean, I felt a tremendous sensuous aspect to all your movements that you depicted, and also something that's going on inside the human body, whether it's you know, the water, the grimy stuff, let's say, that's moving through your digestive system, or through your moments of conception, for example. And that kind of movement is, you know, if you know about it, I mean, you enjoy it sensuously. So were you anywhere sort of enjoying those moments, or it was just you were focusing more on this aspect of the problem and the, you know, the aspects of pain?
Both, I would say, but your question is specifically related to the action while I'm working, if I enjoying. Yeah, of course. But it's also come from something dramatic. So, in fact, it's a kind of transformation. No? You totally get it. What you said, it's better than whatever I just said since 1 hour talking. You could talk about my work, actually. And yeah, life and death are both two themes inside my work. Inside, outside, all this. Yeah, so the earth and what's going on in our universe, no, as a nature, as and as immigration, it's everything in there, no, from the micro and macro are aspects inside our world. So we are all talking about the same theme, I believe. No, it's just maybe the difference is just the way you express, but the concept, I think, all the artists say the same, right?
Thank you. Did Mr. Hoskote want to? And then, yeah.
A quick question. Speaking to something Nancy raised, but if both Nancy and Mort, I'm going to ask you to join this conversation. Don't pretend you're just the chair. Oh. Okay, but I want to draw you out a little bit, Nancy, on two things you said. When you introduced leopards, you invited us to see leopards practice as possibly an artistic practice. You invited us to set aside nominalism, the names we give to particular practices, and then you also said that we should set aside how institutionally we circulate as artists or writers or curators. Still leaves me with a question of what act or gesture or form of acceptance it is that sanctifies something as an art practice. I'm saying this also because as you were speaking, and as all of you were speaking, I kept thinking of our own friends, longtime colleagues, people we've worked with, and the moments at which somehow they, if you will, became artists. Particularly I'm thinking of Ravi Agarwal, who had a long pre-artist life as an activist, as an environmental activist. There's, if you will, a chance that his photographs were taken up into Documenta by Okwi. And then after that, there's been a new life as an artist. A number of other people like that. Or when you said that artists play the role of, did you say conveners, curators, or programmers? I mean, you do have these questions, but what resides in that name of artist? And you made a persuasive case for Lippard as an artist. In the same way, I was thinking of a number of things that Navjot does, which are, in that sense, extra artistic. So something you said also, Navjot, when you said, I realized that it wasn't only artists who made interventions in public spaces, but also biodiversity specialists and so on. So two crisp questions. One is, what is the act or gesture that sanctifies someone as an artist or their practice as artistic? And honestly, why is it that that has a certain life and culture, whilst the work of engineers or biodiversity specialists doesn't?
And I was going to ask Navjot, in fact, when the idea of de-choking the trees within that kind of the particular project, when the municipality then takes up the project thereafter, is the residue of the artwork then also conferred to their act, to the very act that they, by virtue of it being the residue of your own project in a way? Not that I'm trying to deflect from me onto me. Either of you, I think Nancy and Navjot.
Why shouldn't we consider, an action, initiated by the artist and taken up by the municipal corporation or, the biodiversity scientist collaborating with the artist, not an artistic, move, And in this case, the focus was on, like I said also, that it was not, construction of something which will become something and which will be remembered as, like say my video documentation of that entire thing has become now the work. Barakam, but 2010, if I have to show to somebody, either I show these images or I show the whole process ka video. So I personally feel that we only have sort of, when we're talking about even transdisciplinary, that's why I'm getting more and more interested in now this whole thing of transdisciplinarity, where nobody gives up, one's own expertise, where like if a biodiversity scientist has some things which I don't know, and I have something which he doesn't know, and we come together and we realize something, I think it is art. It is, we have forgotten even to say art of living. We have to think like that, that how do we learn to, learn about life? We've forgotten about that and we have become experts in everything. So biodiversity scientist has his place in his field. I have mine in my field. Environmentalist has his own. But when we come together, we have to see what comes out of it. And what has come out of it is that the benefit for the tree and the environment. See, imagine how many birds and how many, because of those trees, and already biodiversity scientist is good, sir. Fayaz has told me, Navjot, now you should go there and see, bird shit there. So I said, because if the trees are healthy, there are more birds there, and you can make out from the bird shit how many birds must be coming every day. I said, I'll do that. All these days, I went to see whether my plants were all right or not. But see, this is how they recognize, So I think we need to see art in a much broader, much broader field. I think art is not something that should be seen as specialized. It is in many ways because we choose to take up that as a profession.
Yes, thank you. Ranjit's question. It is a difficult question, of course. And again, you spoke about Ravi Agarwal, for instance, who legitimized his practice as art. He was a photographer. He was part of Toxic Link, the NGO which works with environmental issues. He continues to work as an activist with that organization. And I remember a documenter when Okwi had shown him for the first time, and I met him. He just looked like a corporate guy or a banker. And for a minute, it was difficult for me, even me, and I normally, don't allow any kind of stereotypes to blur my vision. But I should say this honestly, because I just looked at him and I said, who's this banker figure? And then I was introduced to Ravi Agarwal, who was this artist who had shown for the first time at the documenta. So I think in Ravi's case, it is very clear. Okwi decided that in that particular documenta, he was going to bring in cultural producers, not necessarily people who studied visual arts in an academy, but cultural producers who could be who could be documenting, ecological issues. For example, somebody like Ravi Agarwal, or people who were working, to study and critique urban culture, like Sarai, for instance. So it was Okwi's agenda, curatorial agenda, to blur this boundary between what constitutes art and what constitutes non-art. And then Ravi Agarwal, Rux Media Collective and others took up that opportunity and they ran with it. And today they are, very successful artists in their own right. But when they began, I'm sure, and I know that Ravi would talk about how, he was not so easily accepted within the art world. But of course, today it's a different case. In Lucy Lippard's case, again, Lucy did not wait to get to wait for a practice to be legitimized by the institutional authorities. In fact, when she was doing her shows in the 60s, it was Greenberg who actually said, "Can you imagine now? Now people like Lucy Lippard have also started curating shows." So so this is the kind of reception that she got for her work in those early days. But she did not care about that, and I think that here, working in solidarity with the artists helped, because then she wasn't just a solo producer of curatorial projects or publications. She worked alongside the artists, and I think that kind of solidarity and collaboration allowed her to create an alternative art scene. So, I don't have an answer for, I definitely have an answer for the politics of, who names somebody as an artist or a non-artist. So I can, of course, speak from that perspective, the politics of institutionality. But I think that there are specific moments where, people are able to negotiate, the limitations of the art world and come out of it on the other side. And some people are able to, and some people aren't. For example, when we are talking about subaltern artists, like Jangar Singh Sham and others, these are artists who, because of their political and economic situation, their work will never be considered the same as that of a metropolitan artist. And Jangar Singh Sham actually died because of that, because of nomenclature, because of the politics of nominalism. So, this is a complex question. And
okay. Yeah, I could have said more. But I think the market also. I think we haven't talked about the market in this. The market certainly, in addition to the institutions, and once Ravi Agarwal makes a fetishized object that can be played within the economies of then. Yeah. And by the way, if the de-choked tree, ultimately, if that became if God forbid there's a hurricane, it topples over, and the municipality wants to sell the work which they made in collaboration with Navjot, then that itself becomes the fetish.
My mind. To historicize that area, how I could have, at that point, because it was a big project and all that, I could have put some kind of sign there, and I could have told municipality, because he was the chief was in his spirits, and I would have said that keep this around the tree so that, for 20 years, 30, as long as that material which I would have tied around the tree or something remains, the people recognize that there's something more than just a bela tree or a neem tree or something like that. But I didn't do this. These are the kind of, you resist, Do you want to make it like that? I mean, that whatever you've done, or you let the tree be tree. So these are the kind of things also artists sometimes feels. Some artists can be very ambitious. I am an ambitious artist, but I would not do something like that. So these are some kind of, you underplay your role, and there also you're taking actually a risk, or you enhance to such an extent that everybody comes to know that this artist has done this, Like everybody talks about Boyce's 700 Oaks.
Yeah.
But are those trees marked, or they become like a forest? We should ask these questions. What has happened to those trees? It was a symbolic gesture. Like I grew 100 mahua trees in Modi Nagar. I haven't gone back to see how many have survived, or my name is on that, or something one could have done. Many artists could have done that also. So I resisted.
Yeah.
But who and how many people's names? There were workers who were working there.
Yeah.
There were, other people.
Yeah.
So how many names should be there? If I put my name, it's not a collaborative. It's not, So many questions come with this kind of...
Quite. More if they have.
No, but
An
it's
interesting-
also, no, that's not...
Yeah. Yeah.
But then we need many people's names, because who transported those trees for me to UP from central India? So that was also quite a sort of, process that the forest department people said, but why do you want only mahua trees? So I had to tell them the whole story. You won't believe, they even came to where we were residing, where we were working, all the artists in Modi Nagar, So one engaged them, then, when it comes to then to take the authority of, that work, so then many questions come to artist's mind also.
So I think we can all enjoy post-conversation over tea and coffee. I'm going to thank once
Thank
again
you.
our three speakers,
you.
and thanks to Avid for inviting us this afternoon. It's been a great alternative to sitting in my gallery listening to the three of you, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
And-
Thank you, everyone.
And I'll hand over to Ursula. Thank you.
So thank you from Avid Learning to Mort, Beatrice, Nancy, and of course Navjot for a very compelling discussion and raising many more questions about our world and how we live in it and how we react to it. Thank you to you, our audience, for being here this afternoon and spending this afternoon with us. Thank you to the Italian Embassy Cultural Center, Mumbai, for partnering with us and making this event possible. And we invite you to have some tea and cookies if you haven't already. We also invite you to attend Art Futures, Creating Future Stakeholders in Art. That is happening on the 7th of September. Do visit us on social media for more, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.